Hi everyone, and welcome to a new edition of You Are My Borough with myself, Scott Wilson, and Dom Shaw from the Northern Echo. You keeping well, Dom?
I am, mate. I am. Yourself?
Yeah, all good. All good. We'll have a little reflect back on the whole game. Dom was at the Riverside for that, so we'll have a bit of a chat on that. We'll have a talk about some of the issues that are kind of bubbling along with Borough at the minute, and then we'll have a look at what is shaping up potentially to be a really, really exciting away doubleheader. Obviously, Burnley and Leeds following hot on the heels of each other. Little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you're watching this on the YouTube vids, as we say, please do like and subscribe to the channel. It helps massively with the algorithms and stuff like that. Drop us a comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want us to talk about in future vids. If you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, then rate and review. And let's get stuck into it. So, Dom, we won't go over the whole game too much, other than to say, obviously, you were there at the Riverside, and on the back of Blackburn, it felt like A, major improvement, and B, I guess a sign of what we all know Borough are capable of, but then a little bit of frustration at just the inconsistencies because we know how good they can be.
Yeah, it felt like quite a big game, didn't it? Really, because if had Borough not won that, to fail to beat either Blackburn and Hull, or either or at home in a week on the back of 3 wins, would have been so frustrating, wouldn't it? It would have felt like a massive missed opportunity. It was interesting that Carrick said afterwards that he was talking about how pleased he was, and he said, like, hopefully it shows the Blackburn game was just a blip. Well, I don't know whether it was just a blip. I still think the issues of the Blackburn game that we touched on last week and what happens when teams come and set up to frustrate and stifle and all that, we won't go over all that again. But I still think that's a question that Borough have got to answer. Hull tried to play a little bit. They just looked a really muddled team, I thought. They looked like a team where the messages had clearly been mixed under the previous manager. And the only real frustration on Saturday was there was that 7, 8, 9 minute spell of like minor anxiety after Hull had scored. But it always felt like Borough were in third gear, really, and could turn it on whenever they really wanted to or needed to, and then they go and get the goal to wrap it up. And I think when you've got the three main players, and we'll get on to Bergzorg, so I thought there's really promising signs from him on Saturday, and there has been promising signs, I think, in recent weeks. But Dael Azaz and Conway coming in for Latte Lath, which obviously we're going to talk about, like they can just turn it on and turn a game and come up with a moment in an instant, can't they? Like Azaz's opener, like Dael turning nothing into something on regular occasions. So yeah, I think it was a big win, and 4 wins from 5. And as you're looking up again, and it just sets you up, doesn't it, for those tough looking games to come.
Let's touch on Azaz though, because it's nearly a year now that he's been a Borough player, and I think there's been times when I think we've alluded to it on vids when he's divided opinion. Some Borough fans have been very much firmly in the kind of we need Azaz's creativity camp. There's been others who have questioned his output and I think at times his end product. It feels like in the last month he's answered an awful lot of those questions, and it feels like it's been the breakout month, if you like, for Finn Azaz. And as you rightly say, that now it feels like, cliche alert, but he's probably the first name on Carrick's team sheet, isn't he, ahead of anybody else?
Well, prior to missing the game with illness last week, he was the only outfield player who'd started every single league game, and he would have started against Blackburn. So only an illness has prevented him from starting every game so far, which I think tells you everything in itself. He's probably the only like real natural number 10. It goes back to the conversation we were having last week, doesn't it? In his absence against Blackburn, and I think he's playing with a swagger now. I was thinking this on Saturday watching him. There's just when like Tuba was flying in the second half that season, and you could tell every time he got the ball, he knew something was going to happen, or he felt something was going to happen. Well, Azaz looks like that, and the opening goal on Saturday, like. He makes it look so great finish, little shimmy, great finish. But because we've seen that quite often from him in recent weeks, it kind of feels like just another Azaz goal. But his goal involvement, is that 11 now in his last 7 appearances? That might be
He's top of the Championship assist table, isn't he? Even ahead of Dork. I think he's two clear.
Yeah, and he created the most chances, or the second most chances in the league prior to the weekend game. I haven't checked that. I just think we had this conversation after last week. It's not just what Azaz brings, but it's the balance that he gives to the rest of the attack. So Dork looked much better and much more dangerous on Saturday than he did against Blackburn. I thought Bergzorg made a difference up front. It helps the midfield, I think, when there's not a big gap between the midfield and the attack when Azaz is in there to knit it up. I think he's undoubtedly one of Borough's most important players. I know we're going over all ground here. I think there's a case to be made that he's Borough's most important. Although Aidan Hackney showed his importance at the weekend as well, I thought, because just the positivity and the driving from midfield, getting the ball and driving. There was one stage early in the second half where he got the ball in his own half. There was 3 men on him, and he just drove through them and into the whole half and turned Borough on the attack. Obviously, gets the interception for the opening goal. I think we saw without him and then with him, Azaz and Hackney, just how crucial they both are.
And just last one on Azaz, we saw, didn't we, how important and how effective Chuba was when he played in, not the same position, but largely the same position as the 10 behind a central striker. I mean, I think there's definitely an argument that the way Carrick sets up his side, that's the most important position on the pitch, because it's the one that everything kind of goes through and it knits everything together, isn't it? Creative wise.
Yeah, and then when Conway was, I think Conway has been effective in that position earlier this season, but it didn't work last Wednesday. And then because of that, Borough were even more reliant on Dork on the right, and that allowed Blackburn to maybe stick another man or to divert extra attention on Dork. It didn't help because obviously it wasn't really happening for Borough on the left side, was it, last week? But Bergzorg, I thought, come in and made a difference there. And there was just such a better balance to the attack. But we talked about this earlier in the season, didn't we? When Azaz was played on the left, the balance didn't feel right. It just feels like Azaz being in that number 10 role kind of knits everything else around him, I think. Everything else around him it feels much more balanced and right when he's in there pulling the strings.
Now, Conway and Latte Lath, Michael Carrick will say, perfectly understandably, it's the ideal scenario for a manager. It's the perfect problem to have. 2 strikers playing. Whichever one you're picking seems to work. You can interchange. We had some quotes from Conway after the weekend, didn't we? Where he was basically saying, look, we're both perfectly happy with the situation. We want to play. We fully understand there's going to be games when we don't. It's all about making an impact when you come off on the bench in that scenario, etc., etc. Everybody's saying the right thing. Is it really that harmonious? Can it be that harmonious? Or ultimately, is there going to have to be a number 1 and a number 2? Because at the moment, it doesn't really feel like there's that divide. But will we get to a stage where there is one? In these next 2 games, big games, are we going to see Carrick kind of let us know who his number 1 is?
I don't know. Like I can already feel that this is going to sound like a cop-out, but I genuinely don't think he has a number 1 at the minute.
No, that's fair. I don't think that's a cop-out. I think that's fair. I mean, that's the evidence of the last month would suggest that. Yeah,
so like a week ago, you'd have said Latte Lath is going to start at Burnley or Leeds, whereas now you'd expect it to be Conway on Friday night. I think I'd be surprised. I said to Carrick after the game on Saturday, it's not often a manager is in a position where you can rest. I was going to say drop, but he didn't drop him. He dropped Latte Lath earlier in the season, didn't he? Yeah. He didn't drop him on Saturday. Leave out a striker like 7 days after a hat-trick. And he said, it's not really very normal, but, credit the lads and we've shown the importance of them. And I think if you look at the top of the Premier League table at the minute, Liverpool, well, obviously Salah's going to start, but then game to game, really, who's Arne Slot going to play? Like Nunes, Diaz, Gakpo, Jota. It's like horses for courses, really, isn't it? And
who's the Nunes?
Yeah. It can be a compliment and an insult, that can't it? Depending what day.
It's about 2 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. So I genuinely think the that Carrick's in a position where he can judge it game to game. The other thing is, clearly Borough don't want to lose Latte Lath, but in January, we saw what happened in the summer. That there's a chance, isn't there, that there's going to be speculation again that things are going to happen. Well, if Borough are right there in the promotion mix, they're not going to lose. They're not going to want to lose one of the best players, one of the best strikers, one of the best attackers. But they're in a slightly different position now. In the summer, Conway had just come in. You had hopes for what he was going to do, but now you've got someone there who's scored more goals than Latte Lath. He's got the best minutes per goal ratio in the Championship, 8 goals already, considering he had the injury spell out as well. And I think Conway's had a hugely impressive start. And it will be interesting to see how it plays out. I expect Conway to start at Burnley on Friday. I don't know, what do you think? I think Conway will start at Burnley on Friday night, but then there's every chance Latte Lath plays at Leeds 4 or 5 days later.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, and you can kind of see Carrick's thinking if that's what happened. You know, Burnley feel like a very well-organised team. They barely give a chance away, let alone a goal, do they? You know, their goal concession record this season is unbelievable. So it feels like a game where Borough are probably going to have to be quite technical and quite creative. Those little triangles that we've talked about with Conway, Azaz and Doak feel like they could be pretty effective against Burnley. Now, Leeds feels a little bit more like it could be a basketball game. We attack you, you attack us. It feels like there'll be more gaps in the final third for Borough to potentially get behind Leeds and maybe have to play on the break a bit more. And that style undoubtedly suits Latte Lath and Bergzorg to a T, as we kind of saw against Luton, didn't we? So, you know, I think if that's the way that Carrick goes, and I think you can quite justifiably say it's horses for courses, and I guess that's what you want, isn't it?
And the point I made in my report at the weekend of the whole game was, where I start having this conversation now, opposition managers and opposition coaches are going to be playing the same guessing game, aren't they? Now, I know you prepare for both. They're not going in blind. Clearly, they prepare for both. But it's different, isn't it? If you play Man City, you know Haaland's going to be up front and you prepare for that. Well, Conway and Latte Lath are different players, aren't they? And they present different challenges and they have different skill sets. So I think that's beneficial as well. And then the other thing is, I kind of think the point was made on Saturday. I said earlier this year, like watching Doak kind of reminds me of Adama when teams were just sticking 2 and 3 men on him. Get the ball to Adama. Teams were sticking 2 or 3 men on him, knew what he was going to do, but couldn't stop him anyway. Well, the big difference is then it was get the ball to Adama. And if it doesn't work, it's like, Christ, what do we do now? You know, we saw that Villa game when Alan Hutton, I think it was, who did a job on Adama, and Borough had no plan B at the time. Whereas now, all right, focus on Doak, but switch off for a minute and Azaz will do what he did to open the scoring at the weekend, or Conway will score, or you've got Bergzorg on the other side, and that's without like McGree and Force and Latte Lath. So there feels like such variety. It's no surprise, is it, that Borough are the Championship's top scorers when you think of those threats. I think they should be, really, shouldn't they? With those threats, they should be among the league's best performers in attack. Yeah.
You mentioned Hackney a bit earlier as well, whose return probably caught us a little bit by surprise, kind of slightly un-Carrick-like, throwing him right in there without a little spell on the bench or anything like that. You know, I think we said when both him and Morris were out, Howson and Barlaser can come in and do a job, but would you want them playing as the only options for a prolonged period? Well, you know, with the greatest respect to both of those players, I think in one game we probably saw the way that Hackney completely changes the complexion of that central midfield balance.
Yeah, it's one of them, isn't it? I guess a bit like Azaz, where it's only sometimes in the absence you realise just what to do. And we talked earlier in the season, didn't we, when Hackney was getting a little bit of stick. Maybe it wasn't a bit of stick, just a couple of a bit of commenting, wasn't there, about a couple of performances? Yeah. But I think he's had a good start. I think he's had a good start to the season, especially considering how frustrating last year was. And he just showed for me on Saturday how he just brings a different dynamic to the midfield. There was early on, he gets the ball like midway inside zone half and played this pass kind of towards the opposite corner flag that set Doak away. And just in an instant, it put Hull on the back foot and got Borough forward, obviously. And then you've got bodies forward supporting Doak. Didn't come to a goal, but then Hackney's advanced to make the interception for Azaz. Then there's the interception in the driving run in the second half that I mentioned. I thought he was excellent on Saturday, but credit to Barlaser as well, because Barlaser was excellent against Oxford, disappointing against Blackburn, but then he bounced back. You would expect Barlaser to be in for the next 2 games, and that's a real test, isn't it? If he can kind of step up and help dominate the midfield or help Borough get positive results in those 2 games against Burnley, Leeds, maybe even Millwall again, then fair play to him for coming in and taking his chance. And it might make things difficult for Carrick, mightn't it, when Morris comes back? You would expect when Morris is fit, Morris and Hackney are the 2, but it's like a timely reminder, really, from Barlaser, isn't it? Because a couple of weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, we'd have been having a conversation about potential January exits. If you're gonna move players out, the squad's at its maximum capacity. So if you're gonna have to move players out to bring players in, well, Barlaser might have been one of those that we were talking about. But I think he's actually shown the last couple of weeks, you're well stocked in midfield, but you're one away. You're only 1-2 small problems away from having to revamp in there, aren't you?
Well, especially if we, and I don't want to say it yet by any stretch of the imagination, but if we're maybe coming towards the point where Johnny Howson's not quite able to do what Johnny Howson has done in the past, certainly 3 games in a week, maybe even 2 games in a week, then Barlaser becomes more important. Yeah, I'm going to shamelessly plug very quickly what we've got running along the bottom. You just turn it off, Dom.
Go on, no, it's on again now. Where we go?
I was going to say, if you watch us on YouTube but don't normally read our stuff on the Echo website, then pop along, give it a read. All of our Borough coverage is on there, along with all the rest of North East Sport. Most of the stuff you can access, but there's increasingly more kind of long read stuff that's going to be behind the paywall there. But it's only £1 a month for the first 6 months. So subscribe, give it a go. Again, let us know if there's anything we're doing or we're not doing that you want to read about. Let us know, because it's always good to get that kind of feedback. Right, Dom, just one more kind of half on the weekend. One other player that obviously came back, Dael Fry, first start since February. I mean, it goes without saying, fantastic to see him back in there. A really, really good other central defensive option now for Michael Carrick. Rav van den Berg, obviously, you would expect to be back in the mix in the next couple of weeks. Clearly, Darragh Lenihan still a fair bit further away than that. But it's clearly going to have been a massively frustrating, best part of a year for Dael. But, he's still got the chance to be Borough's main man at centre-half, hasn't he?
Yeah, as good as Edmondson has been, and Clark, we've talked about at length, haven't we? I thought it was interesting again, really, that Edmondson got the nod rather than Clark. That would suggest that Edmondson's above Clark in the pecking order now. And then you've got Van den Berg to come back relatively soon. Lenihan, we're not really sure what the situation is there. We'll ask Michael Carrick about that when we get the chance. So really well stocked in that position. But it's easy to forget, isn't it, that Fry at his best, that there aren't many Championship centre-halves who you'd rather have over Dael Fry. And it's been incredibly frustrating for him, because it was February when he last played, but it's not been one injury. It's not just been one, injury where, you're out for 8 months, you get your head around that. As difficult as it is, you kind of know what the situation is, and you can set out the rehab plan and work towards that date that you've got in your mind. But it hasn't been like that with Dael, has it? It was an initial injury. Then he came back in the summer and then kind of broke down again. I think it was with a calf, wasn't it, when he came back? And then Borough took the decision to, let's play the long game and make sure he's back. And Carrick said after the game on Saturday, really, he's been training now for a number of weeks, and we could have put him in beforehand. He's been on the bench for 3 or 4 games, hasn't he? But they wanted to make sure it was one step forward was going to be the start of plenty more, rather than 1 step forward and 2 back again. And it was just Fry, really, composed, cool at the heart of the defence, played well with Edmondson. As well as Edmondson and Clark have played, I do wonder whether, we've talked about this before, haven't we, whether it quite works with them as a pair.
Yeah.
I thought the dynamic looked better with Fry, be it against a team that didn't really offer an awful lot. We'll find if Fry gets the nod again the next few games, then we'll Burnley and Leeds. We'll find out a lot more about his conditioning and how ready he is, isn't he? But I'd 100% back him to pass those tests.
We'll get on to Burnley and Leeds in a second. But just before we do, one bit of kind of breaking Borough news or Borough-related news anyway. Today, we're recording this on Tuesday, kind of early afternoon. And news coming out of Millwall that Josh Coburn has broken his metatarsal and will be out for what is being described as at least 8 weeks. So at least 2 months, which takes us all the way to the start of February. I mean, he just cannot get a break. Well, that's a very unfortunate choice of phrase, isn't it? He cannot get any luck, can Josh Coburn. Just when he was back again in the Millwall team, back in amongst the goals, and he's going to be kicking his heels on the sidelines once again. It's just one thing after another for him, isn't it?
Oh, and desperately frustrating, isn't it? Because you've got a Millwall team there that are playing well, winning, and he would be central to it, wouldn't he? If he was fit and able to play. And this would have been this is the first opportunity really to see what Coburn's capable of in the Championship week in, week out, isn't it? Now one of those tests, one of the things Borough will be checking to see, I'd imagine, is kind of, is he durable enough to handle it? Well, the first injury was the ankle injury. A metatarsal, I mean, that's just unfortunate, isn't it?
Yeah.
And an injury like that.
It's not like muscular pulls, is it? One thing leads
or a breakdown of the same injury again. It's so it's desperately unlucky for him. You just hope he came back from his first injury slightly earlier than expected, didn't he? You just hope that he can do that again. You just hope that he can be back as long as he's ready. Because even if he's back in February, there's still a decent chunk of the season left. Yeah. He can still play a big part. But you're going to be, 2/3 or whatever of the way through then. It's desperately frustrating for him, isn't it? In what's a crucial season, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Burnley, Friday night. Burnley's home record this season. Played 8, won 5, drawn 3, scored 12, conceded 2. Leeds next Tuesday played 9 at home, won 7, drawn 1, lost 1, 4-20 away 5 against 5. You're not going to get a more testing week in Championship, are you? And yet, as I think Borough fans will quietly say, these can be the games where Borough turn it on.
Yeah, that Burnley game's interesting, isn't it? That 2 goals conceded at home against the Leeds.
Yeah.
The league's best attack. They're a funny team, Burnley, aren't they? They're just kind of finding a way, really, aren't they? They've clearly, I don't know how good they are to watch, but Scott Parker would say, well, what does that matter when you're getting results and you're at the top of the division? It's going to tell us a lot more about Borough, isn't it? These next 3 games, there's no getting away from that. And yeah, I'm pretty confident going into them. We've said it before, haven't we? Had kind of part of me would be more confident of Borough going to Leeds and getting a result than playing a team who were 15th, 16th at home and who were going to come and shut up shop and show no attacking ambition and sit deep and urge Borough to kind of pick the lock. I might be made to look daft next week saying that. But yeah, I think Borough, if teams are going to play against them, I think Borough will back themselves against anyone, won't they? Now, although Burnley are defensively really solid, they're not going to just shut up shop, are they, at home to Middlesbrough in a game like that? The Turf Moor crowd aren't going to settle for that. But those next 2 games particularly, and then that Millwall home game as well, but definitely those next 2 games, I think will tell us a lot more about Borough and probably about the rivals, probably about Burnley and Leeds as well. I watched Sheffield United Sunderland on Friday night, really good game. But
I was there, I was up probably.
Yeah, I'm looking at Sheffield United, top of the division, and thinking, great shakes, really.
I mean, Sunderland outplayed them for big chunks of that game. But, it got a bit crazy, didn't it? The sending offs, the missed penalty, etc. But in terms of the football that was being played, I thought Sunderland was a better side for most of that game. Sheffield United, well organised, gritty, keep in there, all the kind of wilder cliches. And it feels a little bit like that's probably what Burnley are doing under Scott Parker. I mean, if again, we probably haven't seen really enough of Burnley and Leeds to categorically be able to state this, but it does feel like the Burnley game is probably going to be a test of Borough's attacking qualities. Can they break down what's the best defence in the league? The Leeds game feels like it's probably going to be a test of Borough's defensive qualities. Can they stop what certainly on paper and quite often on the pitch has looked like the best attack in the league?
I'm just looking who Leeds have got this weekend. Derby at home, because on the back of that defeat, had Leeds not got a positive result this weekend, then that might have felt suddenly.
It won't take long for Leeds to get twitchy.
No, but you'd back them to get a result at home to Derby at the weekend, wouldn't you? But yeah, I completely agree with that. I think we're good. Friday's definitely going to be more about can free scoring Borough break down this rock solid Burnley wall, whereas, like you said, that Leeds game just has the feeling of a chaotic basketball game, doesn't it? And I don't know how much you can read into the cup game earlier this season. There was too much change teams. The teams will look nothing like it, but Leeds will come to attack Borough, won't they? Yeah. And I do think that'll play into Borough's hands. Clearly you need to get through the early stages, and you don't want to go 1-0 down and all the obvious points. But I do think the way Leeds will play, I mean, we'll do a video before Borough, before Leeds, so we'll talk more about that one. But I do think that could play into Borough's hands on Tuesday. What's a decent point? It's like, so in a situation like this, would you rather win one and lose one? Would you rather get 2 draws? I know that's an obvious one, but because it's a point more, but then you're stopping the teams winning and your momentum.
I think 3 points is a decent return from these 2 games. I think if you said to me that Borough were going to win one and lose one, I think you'd say, well, that will have shown that they're justifiably part of this mix and part of this equation.
But then what you'd want to say is then you follow that up with a win at home to Millwall.
Then Millwall at home becomes very important. Yeah, exactly. What are you rolling onto? And I guess that's still the same if you get 2 draws, isn't it? 2 draws are fantastic results if you then go and beat Millwall. If you don't, and all of a sudden you haven't won in 3, where are you going with it? I mean, I think clearly, if Borough only take, say, 1 point from the 2 games, and it's been a massively disappointing week, clearly if they take either 6 or 4, it's been an absolutely superb week. 3 or 2 is kind of somewhere in between. I think you probably take 3.
And what do you think they'll get?
I think Friday night might be a draw. I think it might even be a very, very un-Borough-esque 0-0 or 1-1. I think they'll beat Leeds. I think they'll win. I think they'll beat Leeds. We'll get more to that when we get to the Leeds one. But I could see it being 0-0, and you don't say that very often with Borough, and that's not because I just think they won't create chances. It's the first time in a long time they're going to have come up with defence against a defence as good as this Burnley one, and we've already seen that actually they can struggle sometimes against teams that are just well drilled against them. Now, I take your point that Burnley aren't just going to sit in; they're not, but they're going to have 2 banks of 4 largely. They're going to make it difficult for Borough to break them down. That they're clearly well organised. I think it'll be a really tight game.
It might be a test. Like we talked more so earlier in the season, haven't we, about a Borough streetwise enough?
Yeah.
And I think that I think it's going to be a test of that on Friday night. Like you look back to that Watford game and you're thinking, well, not winning it is frustrating enough, but don't lose it. At least get your draw. Kind of similar Blackburn, but it feels, it's an offside goal that you're undone by. So I
guess the game that has slight parallels maybe is the West Brom one.
Yeah,
which they did just go and do a really professional job at, and a really good away performance against a good away team. That's what Borough are going to have to do. If Borough win on Friday night, I suspect it'll be 1-0.
Yeah. And it'll be. I mean, I know this is the type of thing you throw around, but if you go and win at Burnley or Leeds, really, it's clearly a statement win. Yeah. It is a win that.
Especially off the back of a month that's shown what Borough are capable of in attack, shown that, on their day they can sweep aside any team in the league. Well, if you then go and say grind out a result at Burnley or outplay Leeds, then off the back of that, that's a real we're here and we're going to be here to stay kind of statement.
Well, Michael Carrick speaking to the press on Wednesday afternoon this week. So Scott's heading over to Rockcliffe for that. So we'll have full reaction, obviously team news, injury news from that. We'll see what we get from it. Can't promise much on the
injury. And then you're at Turf Moor, aren't you?
And then I'm at Turf Moor Friday night, yeah. So, we'll have full build-up before the game on Friday, and then obviously reaction and analysis over the course of the weekend. Do get in touch, as Scott said at the start, if there's anything you want us to discuss on these vids coming up. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Rate, review if you're listening on your podcast platforms. Enjoy the rest of your week. Safe travels to Turf Moor if you're going to Burnley on Friday night, and we'll be back next week to look back on that and to preview the Leeds game. Take care.